Hey guys, welcome back inside of the Plastic Planet. I am your host, Nick Nack, hanging out with you guys today. Hey guys, today we're going to be doing part 3, basically. This is sort of becoming a multi-part video collection, so to speak. But we're going to be doing part 3 of sort of my Star Wars action figure inventory, so to speak. The last 2 videos, we looked at some random boxes that I have of my modern Hasbro Star Wars figures. Well, today, we're going to be going even further back in the Plastic Planet time machine, and we're going to be taking a look at a number of my vintage Kenner Star Wars action figures. Many of these are from my childhood. Some I've bought later on and sort of restored using reproduction parts. And I'm just going to say one thing about that, and then hopefully we won't have to talk about that anymore. I am a full advocate of reproduction parts on Kenner Hasbro Star Wars figures. These are things that I bought off eBay for not a lot of money. They're things that people have 3D printed off and put a lot of time-staking care into producing, and I don't have a problem with it because, in my opinion, if someone can restore their childhood Han Solo to something that makes it shelf-worthy, I'm all about that because I am not in the collecting game for the monetary rationale. I am in it for the nostalgic. And so if you really have a problem with reproduction parts, you and I have very different visions on what collecting is all about. So, with that said, let's go on. Let's take a look at these action figures, and I will point out what parts are reproduction and what part are vintage, just so that you guys know that I know what I'm talking about. All right, guys, let's get to it right now. Alrighty, guys. Well, I got my little action figure stage all set up and ready to go for our very first figure today, and that is, of course, let's start out with a classic, guys. Let's start out with Boba Fett. Now, this is a Boba Fett that actually I bought a little more recently in the last couple of years, maybe about 10, 15 years ago. I had my vintage Boba Fett for years and years, but I actually think he is in the safekeeping of Uncle Pat right now. So I have this guy right here. I think I traded Uncle Pat, my vintage Boba Fett, for some custom work he did a number of years ago on some modern figures. And so I'm okay with that because I've got this one, and this one is in great shape still. Paint apps look really good. I don't believe that is the original gun he came with. Again, I believe that's probably a reproduction gun because I don't think he came with a solid gray gun. But nevertheless, looking really, really nice. There is Boba Fett. Awesome. Awesome. I've had several renditions of, I've had several different vintage Boba Fetts over the years. They've, some of them, like I said, one of them ended up in the care of Uncle Pat. Another one got chewed up by my family's dog when I was very, very young in a hotel room. That was a bummer. And I actually still have that piece somewhere. Maybe at some point I'll get that out for you guys. Next up, along those Empire Strikes Back line there, we have the twin car cloud car driver. And he does have his little communicator with him, and I'm missing his gun, but still very cool. There's the twin car cloud car pilot. I believe I picked him up off eBay a number of years ago, but there he is. I don't remember what year he came out in, maybe 1981, 1982, somewhere in there. And continuing along that Empire Strikes Back line there, we have Dengar. Dengar was never really a playable figure for me. I was never really a big Dengar fan. I don't know why. He just was kind of silly. And I've had this one since my childhood. This is an original Dengar from my childhood. And I mean, he's fine. He looks fine, but you know, I don't know. He's just someone that I didn't play with a lot. So this figure is in fantastic shape because, like I said, I rarely played with him. His joints are very tight, and he is in remarkable shape considering I have had him for probably almost 40 years now. Incredible. Alrighty, guys, continuing along that line. Oh, God, he's so tall. He doesn't even fit in the shot. Let's back him up a little bit there. IG-88, guys. This is a figure I picked up off eBay a number of years ago. Had him as a child, but of course he got lost to the sands of time, so to speak. When I mean sands of time, I'm probably talking about a sandbox. But yeah, he got lost, but I picked this one up as a replacement a number of years ago. Great shape, great looking figure. Really enjoy having him around. Again, I believe all of these guns are reproductions, but again, I'm okay with that. As I have said in previous videos where I've talked about this, if you were a car enthusiast and you were attempting to restore a vintage classic car, it's very unlikely you would be able to afford or be able to obtain all original parts for it, and I kind of feel the same way about vintage Star Wars figures in that regard. Next up, we got Bosk, and he is looking really cool. It's a fantastic Bosk. This is my Bosk from my childhood. Do have him. I did buy a number of these stands. You guys can see they're on little stands here, and that makes it nice for me to stand them up while we're doing this video. But I did pick up these stands in bulk a few years ago off eBay as well, and so that makes these things really easy to display. And Bosk's really good, and he does have his little rifle there. Again, I believe that's a reproduction, but very cool. There is Bosk. Put him back here a little bit. He's a little tall. There he is. All right, up next is a classic figure, one of my favorites, and from my childhood as well, with a reproduction weapon, or whatever this little insert diode thing is he's coming with. That is 21B. Look at 21B. This was a figure from my childhood, the exact figure that I had as a kid. Have had him for almost 40 years, and he is gorgeous looking. Again, we're kind of got an Empire Strikes Back theme going on right now, but I'm just pulling out of the box at random. This isn't by design, but he is absolutely fantastic. 21B. I always loved the transparent midsection on him. I always thought that was very cool, as well as his vocabulator, whatever that thing is that attaches to his midsection and goes up to his mouth. Always just really cool. Very cool droid. Always been a fan of robots going way back. Alrighty, guys, coming up next, we got a Han Solo in trench coat. Gun is a reproduction. The trench coat is original. This was from my childhood. I got him off a card when I was a kid in 1983, I want to say. Probably for a birthday or something, but again, all the pieces on here are reproduction, or not are original, except for the gun, I should say. You will notice the play wear on his hair, so this was a well-loved figure in my collection as a kid. So very cool, from Return of the Jedi. Alrighty, guys, coming up next, we have an Obi-Wan Kenobi that I bought off eBay. I can get him in the shot. There he is. All right. I believe the saber is a reproduction. The cape is also a reproduction. Crap. And I can tell the cape is a reproduction because the vinyl is actually much sturdier on him than what would be vintage. A vintage cape, the material feels a lot more malleable and frankly not as sturdy. Whereas the reproduction it's cut with actually a much better quality vinyl than the originals were. So again, I'm not devaluing, having original. Having everything original is obviously optimum, but if you can't and you can't afford to, pay $40 for a vintage cape that is probably torn up, or don't want to pay $40 for a vintage cape that is probably torn up, this is a great option for you. Again, I don't have any plans on reselling these and trying to fool anyone into thinking they're all original either. That would be where the sin would come in. I buy these. My figures are for me. They will always be for me. And that's just the way it is. So anyway, he is absolutely awesome. Alrighty, guys. Coming up next is a indoor Rebel Trooper from my childhood. No accessories on him, but he still looks awesome. He's got some paint wear on him. This was a well-loved figure. This was one of those figures that, it wasn't my Luke Skywalkers. It wasn't one of my Han Solos. It wasn't one of my Princess Leia's or my R2-D2s, or one of my mainstay characters. So he took a lot of abuse. He spent a lot of time getting thrown into mud pits and getting buried in sand and everything. And I'm surprised I still have him, to be honest, because he took a lot of abuse when I was younger. But he is still here and still holding up and still pretty display worthy. I have him displayed on my Ewok Village, my vintage Ewok Village upstairs in the main Plastic Planet display room. But still awesome to see my Rebel Commando indoor Rebel Trooper looking very cool. Along those same lines here is, I believe, Low Gray from the Return of the Jedi line from 1983. He is really awesome. All original parts on this one. These are from my childhood. All the parts, everything. I had this figure, like I said, from my childhood. I was not a huge Ewok fan even when I was a little kid. I thought they were neat, but they weren't my favorite thing about Return of the Jedi. Even as a kid, I kind of was I kind of thought the Ewoks were kind of stupid. And so I have a lot of Ewok figures, but a lot of them didn't get played with a lot, and have, as a consequence, a good consequence, have been maintained in really, really good condition. And this figure is one of those, this Logray. He looks absolutely awesome. So Logray the Medicine Man. And we'll put him over here. Looking very, very cool. Coming up next, we have a TIE Fighter pilot. I bought this particular one from a comic book store locally a couple years ago. Came with the stand from the comic book store. So he's in still really good shape. Like I said, I bought him, maybe 2-3 years ago from a comic book store. You know, I really went on a big vintage binge a few years ago, and then collected as many as I could, and then it just got to the point where I got priced out once I started trying to buy a number of the original Power of the Force figures from 1985. You know, the coin ones, the ones that came with the coins. Those were just and still are to this day, insanely priced. And you know, I'm not going to pay the same amount that I would pay for a Hot Toys figure for a vintage Star Wars figure. They're just not that big of a priority for me in my collection, but I still enjoy having them, and I still enjoy collecting them a lot. So I have almost the entire, I believe I might have almost the entire 92 figure run. I'm just missing the last wave of those. Coming up next, we have a Tusken Raider, as I'm dropping things off of him. Hang on for one sweet second there. We have a Tusken Raider. And here's a figure that is also sort of a mixed. This figure was from my childhood. I've kept him in pretty nice shape. The original vinyl cape. This is the original vinyl cape, and it's a tactile thing, guys. I know it's not going to be. I can't do it justice on the video, but just trust me. The vinyl cape is a little softer. The material is a little softer than what was on that Obi-Wan back here, which has a reproduction vinyl cape. So the material is a little softer. I think the Gaddafi stick is also a reproduction. But the figure itself was from my childhood, as well as the cape. I managed to keep the cape on that one. This was a figure I got, you know, later on in my childhood when I started taking better care of my things. We all have that transition point when we were kids, from where we just, you know, treated these things like garbage to where we actually really began valuing them and not wanting to lose them after we lost a few of them, in, you know, in sandboxes and at our friends' houses and etc. So he was one of those figures that I had got. As I'd gotten a little older and managed to keep in fairly good condition outside of losing the original Gaddafi stick, which of course has been replaced with a reproduction. So, moving along, guys, we have my original X-Wing fighter pilot, Luke Skywalker, from when I was a kid. This was probably the second figure of this that I got, as I lost the original one in at a construction site I was playing around with when I was a kid. You know, back in the 80s, you could just play anywhere you wanted to. And I remember playing on some giant dirt mound in a construction site with my action figures. Probably not a really good idea. But I remember losing this figure in that construction site. I've told that story before here on the Plastic Planet. But anyway, this is the second one I got, and this one I managed to keep in really good shape. So he is fantastic. Really glad to still have him here. And he looks good. Looking really fantastic. Alrighty, guys, next up we have a AT-AT driver from my childhood as well. All original parts on this one, I believe. This was a great figure. He is in really good shape. I think he spent the lion's share of his existence outside of my childhood, living safely in the cockpit of my vintage AT-AT Walker, along with my General Veers figure. So he is in really good shape. Really nice joints on him, nice stiff joints on him. Not a lot of yellowing, not a lot of paint scuffs. But again, this is one I got probably back when I was 8 years old or so. So he has been with me a really, really long time, and I'm glad he is still part of my collection. So there's the AT-AT driver. I got a lot to get to, guys, so I'm kind of not spending as much time on some of these as I'd like to, but we'll just keep going. Next up is a really boring figure. Everyone probably had him at one point because someone's aunt got him for him, but that is one of two of the original Bespin guards from the Empire Strikes Back line. And that sounds like someone dropped something upstairs in the kitchen, if you guys heard that. But nevertheless, here he is, the original, one of the original Bespin security guards from the Empire Strikes Back, missing his gun. But he's still in really good shape. If you guys can't see, the paint apps are still really good on him. Love his Fu Manchu mustache. Still, his colors are really good. Everything's really good about this figure because he was not played with much because he's boring. I mean, let's just face it. So here he is. We'll put him over there by Logray. All right, guys, coming up next, we have a figure that I picked up as an adult. off eBay. I did not have this figure as a kid, ever. And that, of course, is Walrus Man, Panda Baba, as he is later known. But in the vintage line, he was simply known as Walrus Man, which is almost more fun in my opinion. Love his orange and blue jumpsuit there, looking really cool. Trying to get him to focus on his face is sort of challenging. There it is. So there is Walrus Man. He's got a few paint scuffs on him, but overall he is in fantastic looking shape. I dig him a lot. Nothing wrong with this guy. He is cool. There's Walrus Man for you guys. And next up, all original parts I believe on this guy as well. Got the Admiral, guys. Admiral Akbar. Look at that. This was one of the first mail-away figures that I partook in as a kid. And he came out prior to Return of the Jedi. The mail-away offer came out prior to the Return of the Jedi. You collected like 2 or 3 or 4 UPC symbols from the backs of from Kenner Star Wars figures, plus like $1.99 for shipping and handling, and you put it all in a little envelope, sent off for it, and like 6 to 8 weeks later, you got Admiral Akbar inside of a little tiny box in a baggie, and that was absolutely fantastic. So this was the original one that I got from that mail-away offer. I believe I still have his original little, I don't want to call it a weapon, but his little pointer thing. But yeah, very, very cool. Yeah, he's a very, very cool, fun vintage figure. You know, we all thought he was kind of like Fishman when we first got him. But yeah, there's the Admiral Akbar. You know, anyone who says Admiral Akbar is just a meme or a meme, you're full of shit, because yeah, he's important to me because I mailed away for him back in 1982, assholes. Yeah, I love me some Admiral Akbar. Coming next is a figure. She is all original parts. I purchased her off of eBay a couple years ago. That is Endor Princess Leia. She does have her gun, but it's sort of holstered there on her belt. Soft good poncho, removable helmet. Very cool. This was a really cool thing when she came out, having a helmet to be removable. That was one thing that the Return of the Jedi line really stepped up on back in the day, having removable helmets. That was a first for the line with this particular Princess Leia, as well as the Bouche. So very, very cool. And yeah, she's just absolutely awesome. Again, this was not one from my childhood. I do have this figure from my childhood, semi-complete as well. But this was one I just picked up off eBay in all of her glory here. And I believe she is 100% authentic. So very, very cool to have her. All right, guys, coming up next, we have FX7. FX7 from the Empire Strikes Back. All these little arms can be pulled up. I'm not going to do it right now because he is a very old figure and they're probably a little frail, as well as this sort of rubberized plastic on this other arm is it's ready to snap at the base right there. So I'm not going to manipulate with him much, but his neck does come up a little bit. And he can his head can swivel 365 degrees. Very cool figure. I had this one as a kid. This one I had to buy off eBay because I long time ago lost the original that I had.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
All right, guys. Next we got the scoundrel himself, Lando Calrissian. This is absolutely awesome. This is my childhood Lando. Restored with a reproduction vinyl cape and gun, but really excited to have Lando looking his best, his debonair best in my collection. Yeah, he is absolutely awesome. Love this piece a lot. Very display worthy, and of course this was the original Lando that I had as a kid. So very, very cool. Next up, along those same lines, we have a Darth Vader. Right here. Now this Darth Vader, I actually think is not a vintage Vader. This Vader came out in 1995 in sort of a Hasbro Kenner nostalgia pack that came out in 1995, just prior to the launch of Power of the Force 2, the modern era Star Wars line. So he is very cool. Again, he's a vintage figure, but he is not actually, age-wise, not a vintage figure. He is a sort of a early modern Star Wars figure, but very cool to have, a very clean, nice looking Darth Vader in my collection, even if he truly isn't vintage himself. Next up, we've got Anakin Skywalker. No accessories on him because he didn't come with any. This one was from my childhood. Got him as a mail-away figure, just like the Admiral Akbar. You know, 4 UPC symbols slapped in an envelope, sent off to Kenner in Ohio, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and 4 to 6 weeks later, voila, got him in the mail. And I remember getting him, the day I got him in the mail was very, very cool. This is obviously the Spirit of Anakin figure, as played by the late, great Sebastian Shaw from the original cut of Return of the Jedi. Very, very cool looking figure. And he stayed very nice in my collection. There's, again, not a lot of playability on this figure if you were a little kid, but very fun, and his joints are still very tight, and he is very new-like, considering I got him, 37, 36 years ago. So, yeah, absolutely awesome. There is one more time. Vintage Anakin Skywalker. And I believe he came out in 1985. He was one of the last ones. He was a Power of the Force, original Power of the Force figure that came out. Alrighty guys, coming up next is another pre-modern, post-vintage Chewbacca. This came in that same set, I believe, as that Darth Vader did. And yeah, he is really cool. I believe this figure came out in 1995. I bought that set maybe about 3 years ago and just opened them up. But yeah, he came out in that Kenner re-release set, which included, I think, 4 figures, but he was one of them. So very cool to have him here as well, looking awesome. Very, very cool. Not vintage, but very close anyway. All right, guys, coming up next is another Darth Vader. This one is from my childhood. If I can get him to stand up, he doesn't have a stand on him. I believe the lightsaber itself is a reproduction. However, the cape is not. The cape is that softer vinyl from the original. So the cape is an original vintage cape, as well as the figure itself was from my childhood. You guys can see some paint wear there on the control box, on the environmental control box on his chest. So this was my original Darth Vader as a kid. Well, one of my original Darth Vaders. I think I went through a couple of them, but this was the one that happened to survive, and did survive as a bonus with his original cape intact. So that is absolutely fantastic. You can kind of see the difference here as I stand him up next to that reproduction Vader from the 1990s. You guys can see there is some slight variances and differences between the two, especially in the way that cape lays. I don't know if that is a result of age or not, but nevertheless, not that this figure is a young chicken anymore either. This figure is 25 years old now, whereas this figure is almost 40. So interesting. But anyway, there's a little bit of a comparison, and this figure wasn't played with. This guy's had a much rougher life, but nevertheless, that's a nice little comparison for you guys. That's pretty damn cool. All right, guys, let's keep going though. We got a lot more to get to. Coming up next, we have a vintage. Well, they're all vintage, but a Han Solo from The Empire Strikes Back. This was one I bought off eBay. This was not from my childhood, but he is still in fantastic condition. Very, 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 very tight joints on this guy. I had this guy as a figure, but let me tell you, bad things happened to him because I constantly carbon froze him in a plastic glass with water and ice in the freezer as a kid. And as a result, my original Han Solo, I mean, his joints were just like floppity-doo. And so I think actually his arm fell off at one point from my original. So I had to rebuy this as an adult as a consequence of poor Han getting carbon frozen in my mom's freezer multiple times. But still very cool. Glad to have him back in my collection as well. Alrighty guys, next up we have an R5-D4 that I purchased as an adult. If you watch my last modern vintage Star Wars figure sort of reveal or showcase, I mentioned my modern R5-D4 and how I was excited to get that figure because I mourned the loss of this one for so many years. I had this as a kid in my collection, but lost it unfortunately at some point in my childhood, and did replace him as an adult later on with this one, which he is in really fantastic shape. But still very, very cool, and very, very excited to have this one here in my collection. All right, guys, coming up next, we got Greedo. This is a figure I also bought as an adult. Never had him as a kid, ever. A lot of the original wave, first 12-back figures I didn't have as a kid. I don't even know if Greedo wasn't even an original 12-back. He was the next one. But yeah, never had him as a kid. So I got this one, and he is in great shape. His boots are all nice and shiny, and his awesome space sort of weird 1950s looking spacesuit that Kenner put him in. It obviously wasn't really film accurate, or screen accurate, I should say, but it is really cool and really fun. I love that figure a lot. Next up, we have Zuckuss, or as he was sold back then, FX7, with his original gun and original soft goods and everything else. I know I have his little chest piece on backwards. I understand that, but this is how I've always had it on him. For some reason, when I was a kid, I just thought this looked better, and so I've never actually changed it since he was a kid. This was from my childhood. This exact figure was from my childhood, and I never. He came obviously the other way, and I felt like he was wrong when I got him. Obviously, that was the correct way to have him, but I always preferred to have him like this. So I've just never changed it. That's just personal preference. Just honoring my choice as a child for this figure, and so he'll always be like that. But still very cool. All original parts on that one, so that's really awesome. Coming up next is a Bespin Princess Leia. I bought her off eBay. Very cool. I had her briefly as a child, but lost her. So this was one that I got off eBay. And I think there's mostly all reproduction parts on this one, including the cape. But still very cool. Very awesome. Very display worthy. She looks great. Absolutely fantastic piece. Next up, we have a Snaggletooth. The second version of him, the short version of Snaggletooth, not the tall version, which is worth a ton of money. This is the second version. This was one I also bought as an adult. I can't get him to stand up, though. There he is. So yeah, this is a second version of Snaggletooth. Bought this as an adult, probably off the eBay. But he is very, very cool. And I'm not sure. Yeah, he is very cool. So pretty damn awesome. And lastly, well, not lastly, but we have Lobot. Look at that. Lobot is from my childhood, and that blaster, I believe, is original as well. Lobot is really, really damn cool. Love having Lobot. Looking awesome. I always felt like they were giving us a little more than we needed to see on his backside there. I don't know what was up with that. Never needed to see Lobot's ass in so much detail. But nevertheless, there he is. There's Lobot. Pretty awesome. Here's an Ugnaught from my childhood. All original parts on this one, I know for certain. And he is in fantastic shape. I had a number of Ugnaughts over the years. This was the one that happened to make it out of my childhood intact, as a figure that I got probably later on in my Star Wars collecting run as a child. And still all original parts on him. And he is very, very cool. Love me the Ugnaught. That was a great figure. Didn't play with him much, but he was still very, very cool. Next up, we have a Gonk droid, or as he was known in the original, the Power Droid. Shit. This was a figure that I bought as an adult, and yeah, he is a little dusty, man, but he's really awesome. Love me the Power Droid. I believe all original stickers and everything on him. Looking really, really cool. Alrighty, guys. Next up, we have a Death Star droid. And this one is one I also bought as an adult later on. But he is in fantastic condition, if you guys can't tell. That's a fantastic looking Death Star droid. Really enjoy him. There's Death Star droid there. I always kind of thought, like, you know, in the vintage line, you had C-3PO and R2-D2. And then it kind of felt like you had Death Star droid and R5-D4 kind of felt like they were partners, even though they weren't. And there's no evidence of that on screen or anything. But as kids, you kind of felt like these two were kind of in cahoots. They were kind of buddies, like C-3PO and R2-D2 were. At least I did. Maybe I'm the only one that thought that. But yeah, that's kind of cool. Alrighty, guys. Next up from my childhood, Chief Chirpa. He's awesome. Again, all my Ewoks were in pretty good condition because I just didn't play with them a lot. I liked the Ewoks, but I didn't love the Ewoks. I don't know. It was sort of had mixed feelings on the Ewoks even as a kid. Still do even today. But yeah, love Chief Chirpa. He's pretty freaking awesome. So that is cool. What else we got in here, guys? All right, we got Princess Leia as Boushh. All original pieces here. As you can tell, that mask has seen better days, but that is from my childhood. And what was great about her, I always thought was just an absolutely awesome about that figure, was the fact that her helmet could be removed. And that was something that was such an awesome play gimmick for me as a kid. I really felt like, Star Wars figures at that time, back in 1983, had turned a major corner that you could take helmets off. So that was really, really awesome. I loved having her in my collection, and she got a lot of play out of her just based off that play gimmick. Coincidentally, this figure came out, and then I was hugely disappointed in this one, vastly disappointed, honestly, and that is Luke Skywalker in indoor poncho gear. He was a late figure. He came out in 1985 as part of the Power of the Jedi, or Power of the Jedi with the coin. He came with a coin, and this figure was infinitely disappointing to me because his helmet wasn't removable like the Princess Leia's was over here. And so this figure was just infinitely disappointing to me because I expected to be able to take his helmet off because it was Luke Skywalker, and he did walk around without his helmet on in that particular costume, and it just felt lazy on Kenner's part not to make his helmet removable just like Princess Leia's. That was hugely disappointed. In fact, very often I actually broke the original belt on mine because I would put this poncho on my original Luke Skywalker figure, which I have right here. This was a grail of mine as a kid. This particular Luke Skywalker here. Luke Skywalker in Jedi gear. That lightsaber is a reproduction. The cloak is not. Cloak is original. Figure itself is original from my childhood. This was a grail to me as a kid. I actually got this figure originally before the release of Return of the Jedi. My mom bought it for me at Osco Drug when we still lived in Great Falls, Montana. And sometime between us moving to when we moved down to Colorado from Montana, somewhere along that 3-week stretch, I lost this figure. And I still mourn the loss of that figure to this day because it was the original figure actually had a snap on the Jedi robe, which this one does not. Had a snap, and it did come with a blue lightsaber, because as many of you guys know, Luke Skywalker's lightsaber in Return of the Jedi was originally going to be blue. You can see evidence of that on the Return of the Jedi poster, but because it didn't sync up with him using it against the blue sky backdrop on Tatooine when they were battling Jabba's minions on the Sarlacc pit, the rotoscoping or whatever film technique they used didn't match up. You lost the lightsaber in the blue sky behind Mark Hamill. They went with a green lightsaber, and that's the reason why Luke Skywalker has a green lightsaber in Return of the Jedi. It wasn't a story rationale. It was just a pragmatic one for filmmaking. But nevertheless, the original figure, which came out before the film, and probably Kenner had the designs for long before the film came out, called for him to have a blue lightsaber. And so the first couple waves of him had a blue lightsaber, including the one I originally had, which was lost. And then I went several weeks without even having a Luke Skywalker figure, which really sucked because I remember using Cloud Car Pilot as a stand-in for Luke Skywalker because he kind of looks like Luke if you can't tell by his face sculpt there. But he's not Luke Skywalker. That was a really shitty stand-in. So I was so excited to get this figure, and this exact figure that you're looking at right now. Found him at KB Toys about 3 months after we finally settled in from our move, and I got him, and he's been in my collection ever since. But that is the story behind Jedi Luke Skywalker, and my utmost appreciation of this particular figure. Alrighty guys, let's do a couple more and then we're going to round this video out. I got a Death Star or Star Destroyer Commander here. He looks really cool. There's Star Destroyer Commander. Kind of a boring figure. I honestly, for the longest time, was kind of confused on this figure because of his helmet. I honestly thought he was a rebel soldier from the beginning of A New Hope, or the original Star Wars when they're defending the Tantive V4. They have very similar helmets to this guy, and you don't really see him, the Death Star, or the Star Destroyer Commander, or whatever he is, on screen too much while they're there. You don't see him as much. So I always kind of confused him for a rebel trooper from the Tantive V4, from the blockade runner, but no, he is an Imperial officer. But it's funny how we confuse these things as children a little bit. Next up, got another Ewok here, and this is Tebow. What parts are on him are original from my childhood. So is this figure, but there is Tebow. I always loved his warthog little headdress there, and then of course he had his little horn with him, which is very, very cool. Love me some Tebow. And then we have Wicket. This is another figure from my childhood. There is Wicket. He came out, he was a later figure, came out, I want to say, in 1984. For the longest time, Chief Chirpa was my stand-in for Wicket, because we didn't actually get a Wicket till about a year after the film came out, or maybe 6 months after the film came out. Probably almost a full year, I would say. And so Chief Chirpa for the longest time was my stand-in for Wicket, but it was awesome to finally get a Wicket in the collection, because Wicket is sizably smaller than the rest of the Ewok family in the vintage line. But yeah, very, very cool. That's actually all the Ewoks I have. I only have 3 from my childhood. I wasn't a huge, well, no, I'm lying. I have 4. I have Logray over here as well. But I wasn't a huge Ewok fan, as I mentioned earlier in the video, but still very, very, very damn cool. And finally, we got over here. Let's move over here, guys. We got a Zuckuss figure, and I do have his original gun. I just don't, it kind of fell on the box. But there he is. He was always like the evil C-3PO when I was a kid playing with him. He was sold as Zuckuss, but of course his real name is Forlom, as Kenner historically got those names mixed up. And so even when I'm talking about Hot Toys figures or Sideshow figures or modern action figures, I always confuse the two of them. I always call him Zuckuss. You know, he's technically from the film he is Forlom, but I always call him Zuckuss, and I always call Zuckuss over here right there Forlom. So that's totally Kenner's marketing's fault on that one, but still awesome. Alrighty, guys, I could keep going on for hours. I have a lot more figures I could show you guys, but I'm going to round this out with just a few more special ones to show you guys. First and foremost, this is a figure I found at an antique store, and they only wanted like 15 bucks for him, which was amazing. But he has a removable limb C-3PO, and you guys can see he is in a Kenner baggie, still sealed, from 1981 or 1982, whenever he came out. He's still got his original vinyl case or backpack that Chewbacca would wear, with all of his pieces and parts in him. But yeah, very cool. I can't stand him because he's in a baggie. But that is still an awesome find. Found this, like I said, just a couple years ago at an antique store here in Colorado. But yeah, very, very cool. And then rounding out the action figure portion of this is I've got my childhood original Han Solo. Man, this guy has seen better days, but a lot of love. Look at all the paint wear on his head there, on his hair. If the camera will focus for us. But yeah, so a lot of paint wear on this guy. But yeah, he was well loved. I don't know if he'll stand very good for us. People are dropping stuff upstairs. And then, yeah, here is my original vintage, well, obviously vintage, but Luke Skywalker. And I mentioned in my last video how when I was a kid, I'd put magic marker, not magic marker, but yeah, red magic marker to kind of battle damage up my Luke Skywalker as he got his ass kicked along his hero's journey. And if you guys can see right along his face there, you're going to see a little bit remnants of that magic marker on this figure. So this was a well played with, well loved figure. I've told stories about this one in past videos, but yeah, very, very fun, awesome figure, and very loved as far as collectibles go, because this was so important to me when I was a kid. When my mom found him for me, and when she was back visiting relatives in Iowa, she found him during the Return of the Jedi era of these figures when he was less available. Found him back in Iowa and brought him home for me. That was a special night when she pulled that guy out of a suitcase. So that was very, very cool. Alrighty, guys, rounding this out, let's look at a couple of non-figure vintage items that I have here. And again, this is not all of my vintage figures, although this is a large portion of them. I do have more vintage figures, but again, I don't want this video to go on for an hour and a half, which it probably could. But anyway, check it out. I got this vintage carrying case a number of years back. I believe my lovely, lovely wife bought this for me at a collector store when we were just dating, so she must have liked me. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. Actually, there's stuff in it. I don't even know what's in here. Let's check it out. Yeah, looks like we got a couple more vintage figures in there. Looks like my Bib Fortuna, my General Madine, the ATSD driver, and my vintage Imperial Royal Guard are in there from my childhood. So that's pretty cool. Oops. So anyway, there is that case. Again, the original, one of the original Star Wars carrying cases. It's got a little wear on it. It's old, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And here, I like the graphic design on this one much better. I probably showed these off on the channel before, but at any rate, here is my Empire Strikes Back carrying case as well. Wife bought this for me at the exact same time as she bought the other one, so I got both of these. I know there is a Return of the Jedi one out there as well, but I believe that one's worth a lot more money. It was a little more rare, but again, there's some, the vinyl is a little torn up in places, and I do have figures in this one as well, which I think there are some more vintage in there. I got a Reese gun there, looks like. We got the Rancor Keeper, the Nikto Skiff Guard, the Klaatu Skiff Guard, and Lando in Skiff Guard gear missing his helmet. So very cool. So there is that particular piece. Next up, we have an Oral-B toothbrush. I've showed this off before, I think. An old co-worker of mine gave this to me, knew I was into Star Wars, had this on his desk, and gave this to me. So that was very nice of him, but very cool. I actually had this toothbrush as a kid, but I used it. It was used. But anyway, there's the inside. You guys can see the graphic design on these toothbrushes were pretty awesome. The Return of the Jedi Oral-B toothbrushes. So that's cool. Got this here. In addition, last but definitely not least, and I think I've showed this off as well, but you guys can see it again. Check it out. This is my Return of the Jedi pencil bag from the 3rd grade. From the school year of 1984 to 1985. That's when I had this. And yeah, the zipper still works and everything. There's the inside. Well loved. I used it for one school year and then just saved it because it was special and I loved the design on it. I actually just remember sitting in 3rd grade class, listening to my teacher ramble about some shit and just staring at that pencil bag, just thinking how cool it was. Reminiscing about Return of the Jedi and Vader and Luke dueling it out in front of the Emperor in that film. Of course, when I was a kid, like most kids of the 80s, I just couldn't go home and watch it because we didn't have a VCR at that point. And so, the only way to enjoy Return of the Jedi was in my imagination or maybe in my read-along records that I have that I've talked about on this channel before as well. So very cool, very awesome to see this pencil bag. Alrighty guys, well that is going to wrap up this edition of the Plastic Planet. Hope you guys enjoyed that little trip down memory lane with all my vintage figures, including many from my childhood and many more that I bought as an adult collector, but still an awesome collection. I'm really feel fortunate to have all those figures here in the Plastic Planet here in 2020. Alright guys, well like I said, that's going to wrap things up here on the Plastic Planet. Please safe out there guys, and remember, life is oh so very, very short guys, so stay in and enjoy all your plastic crap for the time being. All right, guys. Till next time. Later. Love you. Bye.